You wake up one morning to find the factory gates locked, main street businesses boarded up, and for sale signs on every block. What seemed impossible yesterday is your new reality today. When Canada's economy crashes, 10 cities will fall first, and yours might be one of them. Windsor, Ontario sits at the top of that list, and what's happening there should terrify every Canadian. Windsor, Ontario, the auto industry's last stand. Cross the Ambassador Bridge from Detroit, and you enter a city gambling everything on four wheels. Windsor, Ontario houses over 30% of its workforce in vehicle manufacturing, making it one of the most dangerously concentrated economies in North America. When General Motors announced layoffs in 2023, entire neighborhoods felt the impact within weeks. You'd be shocked how quickly a single plant closure ripples through Windsor's economy. The Stellantis Windsor assembly plant alone employs over 6,000 workers, but that's just the beginning. Each auto job supports roughly 3 additional positions in suppliers, logistics, and local services. When production slows, the math becomes brutal fast. Here's what makes Windsor especially vulnerable. Over 80% of everything it produces crosses into the United States. A single trade dispute, border delay, or shift in American demand doesn't just affect the factories. It hits housing values, school enrollment, and local tax revenue all at once. During the USMCA negotiations in 2018, Windsor's unemployment rate jumped to nearly 8%, while the national average held steady at 5.8%. Walk through the Riverside neighborhood today, and you'll see the warning signs. Houses that sold for $300,000 in 2019 now sit listed at $240,000, with few buyers. The local Tim Hortons on Wyandotte Street East closed last year, joining dozens of other businesses that couldn't survive on a shrinking customer base. But here's the real problem. Windsor has no backup plan. While other cities diversify into technology or services, Windsor doubles down on automotive. City officials still promote the region as Canada's automotive capital, seemingly unaware that the industry itself is shifting toward electric vehicles produced increasingly in other countries. The writing is on the factory walls, but few want to read it. While Windsor depends on cars, another city stakes everything on energy exports. St. John, New Brunswick. Energy export collapse. The Irving Oil Refinery dominates St. John's skyline like a massive steel fortress, processing over 300,000 barrels daily. But here's what most Canadians don't realize. Nearly 70% of that refined oil flows straight to American markets. When demand shifts or trade tensions rise, this Atlantic port city doesn't just feel the squeeze, it suffocates. You'd be surprised how much St. John resembles a company town disguised as a regional hub. Irving operations directly employ over 4,000 people, but the ripple effects reach every corner of the local economy. Trucking companies, maritime services, even restaurants near the refinery depend on that steady flow of American energy dollars. The numbers tell a stark story. St. John's median age hit 46.2 years in 2023, making it one of Canada's oldest cities. Meanwhile, the population under 35 has dropped by 18% since 2015. Young graduates leave for Halifax, Toronto, or Calgary, taking their spending power and tax contributions with them. Walk down King Street today and count the empty storefronts. Local business owners report foot traffic down 30% from pre-pandemic levels, but the decline started years earlier. The Maritime Mall, once the region's shopping destination, now houses more vacant units than active stores. When your customer base is aging and shrinking, retail dies slowly then suddenly. Here's the kicker. St. John has few alternatives. Unlike Halifax with its universities and tech sector, or Moncton with its transportation hub status, St. John built everything around energy exports. The port handles other cargo, but nothing approaching oil's economic impact. What happens when America's energy independence reduces import demand? What happens when carbon taxes make Canadian refined products less competitive? St. John may discover those answers sooner than expected. From the Atlantic coast to the prairie powerhouse that's not as stable as it seems. Calgary, Alberta, oil capital in crisis. Calgary's glass towers gleam in the prairie sun, projecting an image of endless prosperity and corporate strength. But drive through downtown at rush hour, and you'll notice something unsettling. Entire office floors sit dark, parking lots half empty, and those gleaming buildings mask a city built on increasingly shaky ground. 22% of Calgary's GDP flows directly from oil and gas operations, making it more vulnerable to energy price swings than almost any major city in North America. When oil crashes, Calgary doesn't just slow down, it hemorrhages jobs, tax revenue, and hope faster than most places can imagine. The 2020 oil price collapse hit Calgary like an economic earthquake. Over 35,000 Albertans lost their jobs in a matter of months, with Calgary absorbing the heaviest losses. The unemployment rate spiked to nearly 15%, while the national average hovered around 7%. Those weren't just statistics, they were families suddenly unable to pay mortgages on homes that were losing value by the week. You'd be shocked by what that economic whiplash looks like up close. Downtown office vacancy rates still hover around 30%, meaning roughly 1 in 3 workspaces sits empty. The prestigious Bow Tower, once a symbol of energy sector dominance, now leases floors at discounts that would have been unthinkable during the boom years. Here's the most telling indicator. Calgary food bank usage increased by 42% between 2019 and 2023. In a city where the median household income exceeds $90,000, tens of thousands of residents now depend on food assistance. Behind the luxury vehicles and suburban mansions, families who once lived comfortably now choose between heating bills and groceries. The green energy transition poses an existential threat Calgary hasn't fully confronted. As governments worldwide commit to net zero targets and electric vehicle adoption accelerates, demand for Calgary's primary economic driver faces long-term decline. Unlike diversified cities that can pivot, Calgary doubled down on oil even after multiple crashes proved its vulnerability. While Calgary struggles with oil volatility, an old industrial giant faces different challenges. Hamilton, Ontario. Steel City's slow decline. The smokestacks that once defined Hamilton's skyline still rise above Lake Ontario, but the roar of industry has faded to a whisper. ArcelorMittal Dofasco, the city's steel giant, now operates at barely 60% capacity compared to its peak production years. What was once the backbone of Canada's industrial economy has become a cautionary tale about betting everything on heavy manufacturing. You can see the decline in the numbers that city officials rarely publicize. Hamilton's youth unemployment rate sits at 14.3%, well above the national average of 9.8%. Those aren't just statistics, they represent an entire generation leaving for Toronto, Ottawa, or Vancouver because the jobs their parents relied on simply don't exist anymore. The 2018 U.S. steel tariffs delivered a knockout punch to an already struggling sector. Dofasco eliminated over 800 positions between 2019 and 2022, joining a manufacturing exodus that has hollowed out Hamilton's middle class. Meanwhile, housing costs have surged 37% since 2020, creating an affordability crisis in a city where good-paying industrial jobs are disappearing. Here's what the development headlines don't tell you. Behind the condo projects and arts district buzz, food insecurity in Hamilton has increased by 20% since 2020. The Hamilton Food Share now serves over 40,000 people monthly, many of them families who once considered themselves solidly middle class. Walk through the old industrial neighborhoods, and you'll notice the patterns. Houses selling below asking price, local businesses struggling with declining foot traffic, and young adults commuting to Toronto because Hamilton can't offer the opportunities it once promised. The city markets itself as a cultural renaissance story, but the economic foundation that built Hamilton continues to crumble. The municipal government talks about diversification, but decades of reliance on steel created an economic monoculture that's proving difficult to replace. Unlike cities that gradually transitioned away from heavy industry, Hamilton doubled down on manufacturing just as global competition made that strategy obsolete. From steel production to aluminum dependency in Quebec's quiet crisis, Saguenay, Quebec, aluminum's uncertain future. The Saguenay River cuts through Quebec's wilderness like a silver ribbon, carrying more than just water to the sea. Along its banks sit some of North America's largest aluminum smelters, producing over 400,000 tons annually, roughly a quarter of Canada's entire aluminum output. But here's the dangerous reality most Canadians don't know. 80% of that production heads straight across the border to American buyers. You'd be amazed how completely Saguenay depends on a metal most people take for granted. The Rio Tinto and Alcoa facilities employ over 8,000 workers directly. But when you factor in suppliers, transportation, and service jobs, nearly half the region's economy revolves around aluminum production. When global prices drop or trade tensions rise, the entire city feels the impact within weeks. The 2018 aluminum tariffs offered a preview of Saguenay's vulnerability. Production cuts led to temporary layoffs affecting over 1,200 workers, while spot prices for Canadian aluminum fell 15% below pre-tariff levels. Local businesses, from restaurants to car dealerships, watched their customer base shrink as uncertainty gripped the community. But the deeper problem isn't just trade policy, it's demographics. Saguenay's population has declined by 4% since 2015, with young adults leaving for Montreal or Quebec City at alarming rates. The median age now exceeds 43 years, and local schools report declining enrollment every year. When your primary industry requires fewer workers due to automation, and your young people see no future locally, the math becomes brutal. Here's what makes this especially concerning. Unlike oil or steel, aluminum faces increasing competition from lighter materials and recycling programs. Electric vehicle manufacturers, once seen as aluminum's salvation, are experimenting with carbon fiber and advanced composites that could reduce demand for new aluminum production. The Saguenay region built everything around one export commodity, flowing to one major market. That's not diversification, that's an economic time bomb with a very long fuse. Another Quebec city faces similar resource dependency challenges. Trois-Rivières, Quebec industrial heritage crumbling. Trois-Rivières sits at the confluence of three rivers, a location that once made it Quebec's industrial powerhouse and now threatens to become its economic graveyard. The massive Kruger paper mill that employed thousands for over a century now operates with skeleton crews, while the Alcoa aluminum smelter runs at reduced capacity, both struggling against global competition and declining American demand. You can measure Trois-Rivières' decline in the exodus of its young people. The working-age population has dropped by 11% since 2010, leaving behind an increasingly gray city where the median age now approaches 45 years. Local high schools report that over 60% of graduates leave the region within 2 years, heading to Montreal, Quebec City, or Toronto in search of opportunities their hometown can no longer provide. The numbers paint a stark picture of industrial collapse. Manufacturing employment in the Mauricie region, centered on Trois-Rivières, fell from 42,000 jobs in 2000 to barely 28,000 today. The paper industry alone shed over 8,000 positions as digital media reduced demand and American mills undercut Canadian producers on price. Here's what makes this decline especially painful. These weren't just jobs, they were careers that built middle-class families for generations. Workers who started at the mills in the 1980s expected to retire there, but automation and global competition had different plans. Many now commute to Montreal or Quebec City, turning Trois-Rivières into an expensive bedroom community for jobs that exist elsewhere. The city's industrial infrastructure remains impressive: massive facilities, deep-water port access, and established transportation networks. But infrastructure without viable industries becomes a monument to economic decline, rather than a foundation for growth. Local officials promote the region's logistics potential, but that's a poor substitute for the manufacturing base that once made Trois-Rivières prosperous. Walk through the old industrial neighborhoods and you'll see the classic signs: houses for sale below market value, local businesses struggling with reduced foot traffic, and a general sense that the best days are behind rather than ahead. from Quebec's industrial towns to British Columbia's resource-dependent north. Fort Nelson, British Columbia, ghost town in the making. Drive north from Fort St. John for 3 hours through endless boreal forest, and you'll reach what might be Canada's most endangered community. Fort Nelson sits over 1,000 kilometers from the nearest major city, surrounded by wilderness that once promised prosperity through natural gas and timber, but now feels more like a prison of economic isolation. The collapse happened faster than anyone predicted. When Encana and other major gas companies pulled out of the Horn River Basin between 2015 and 2018, Fort Nelson lost its primary economic engine overnight. The forestry sector followed suit as global lumber prices made northern BC operations unprofitable. What was once a bustling resource town of 5,500 people has shrunk to barely 4,400 residents today. You'd be stunned by how quickly essential services disappear when the tax base evaporates. The local hospital now operates with reduced hours, forcing residents to drive to Fort St. John for anything beyond basic care. The RCMP detachment was downsized, and the town's only grocery store struggles to stock fresh produce due to transportation costs that make a head of lettuce cost nearly twice what it would in Vancouver. Here's the brutal mathematics of isolation. Everything costs more and pays less. Heating, fuel, internet service, even basic car repairs carry premium prices, while job opportunities dwindle to government positions and service work that pays barely above minimum wage. Young families pack up and leave every month, taking their children and tax contributions with them. The infrastructure built for a thriving resource town now feels oversized and expensive to maintain. Streets designed for heavy industrial traffic crack under the freeze-thaw cycle, with insufficient tax revenue for proper repairs. The community center that once hosted hockey tournaments and town meetings sits mostly empty, a monument to better times that may never return. Fort Nelson represents the endgame for resource-dependent communities. When the resources disappear and geography works against you, even survival becomes a daily challenge. While Fort Nelson faces extreme isolation, another city struggles with different geographic challenges. St. Catharines, Ontario, manufacturing's forgotten casualty. St. Catharines looks picturesque from the Queen Elizabeth Way, nestled between vineyards and the Welland Canal with Niagara Falls drawing millions of tourists just minutes away. But drive into the city itself and you'll discover one of southern Ontario's most persistent economic disasters. A place where the promise of reinvention collides daily with the reality of industrial decline. When General Motors closed its St. Catharines powertrain plant in 2010, it didn't just eliminate 1,400 jobs, it shattered the economic foundation of a city built on blue-collar prosperity. Today, St. Catharines posts unemployment rates consistently above 9%, making it one of southern Ontario's worst performers while neighboring regions recover from manufacturing losses. You can see the desperation in the daily migration patterns. Over 30,000 St. Catharines residents now commute to Hamilton or Toronto for work, turning what was once a self-sustaining industrial city into an expensive bedroom community. The average round-trip commute costs over $400 monthly in gas and highway tolls, money that leaves the local economy every single day. Here's the crushing irony. Housing costs have surged 43% since 2020, despite the lack of local employment opportunities. Young families who might have afforded homes on factory wages now find themselves priced out of their own hometown. The median home price exceeds $500,000 in a city where the median household income remains below the provincial average. City officials promote tourism and cultural initiatives, but the numbers reveal the limitations of this strategy. The first Ontario Performing Arts Centre, built with significant public investment, struggles to fill seats outside major touring productions. Meanwhile, downtown St. Catharines shows classic signs of retail decline. Vacant storefronts, struggling restaurants, and businesses that close by 6 p.m. because there simply isn't enough foot traffic to justify staying open. The Niagara region's wine industry provides some economic activity, but most of those jobs pay hospitality wages rather than the manufacturing salaries that once built middle-class neighborhoods. From southern Ontario's struggles to the prairie's unique border challenges, Lloydminster, Saskatchewan, Alberta, border town breakdown. Lloydminster straddles the Saskatchewan-Alberta border like no other Canadian city, with residents literally walking between provinces to buy groceries or visit friends. This unique geography once seemed like an advantage access to two provincial economies, tax systems, and opportunities. But what looked like strength has become a bureaucratic nightmare that's slowly strangling the city's economic future. You'd be amazed how complicated life becomes when your city operates under two different provincial governments. Business licenses require dual applications. Healthcare coverage varies by which side of the street you live on, and even municipal planning becomes a jurisdictional maze. Companies looking to expand often choose simpler locations rather than navigate Lloydminster's administrative complexity. But the real problem isn't paperwork, it's oil dependency that makes Calgary look diversified by comparison. Over 80% of Lloydminster's economy connects directly to upstream petroleum operations, from drilling and extraction to pipeline maintenance and oil field services. When oil prices crashed in 2014, the city's unemployment rate spiked to nearly 12%, while thousands of workers simply packed up and left. The scars from that crash remain visible today. Drive through any residential neighborhood and you'll see houses that have been for sale for months, their asking prices steadily dropping. The downtown core shows classic signs of economic decline. Commercial vacancy rates above 20%, restaurants that close by 7 p.m., and retail spaces that sit empty for years between tenants. Here's what makes Lloydminster's situation especially precarious. The city can't retain young people. Local high schools report that over 70% of graduates leave within 2 years, heading to Edmonton, Saskatoon, or Calgary for university and career opportunities that don't exist locally. When your economic base depends entirely on one volatile industry and your young people see no future there, the mathematics become brutal. The border that once made Lloydminster unique now feels like a trap, creating complications without compensations while the oil industry it depends on faces an uncertain long-term future. Our final stop takes us to Alberta's most scenic and vulnerable region, Alberta West Region. Beauty masking fragility. The Rocky Mountains rise like cathedral spires west of Edmonton, their snow-capped peaks hiding communities that tourists glimpse briefly on their way to Jasper National Park. But behind the postcard scenery lies Alberta's most vulnerable region, where towns built on resource extraction now face a perfect storm of economic collapse and environmental threats that could erase them from the map. Grande Cache once thrived as a coal mining powerhouse, its population swelling to over 4,000 residents during the boom years. When Grande Cache Coal shut down operations in 2020, it didn't just eliminate jobs, it gutted the entire reason for the town's existence. Today, barely 2,500 people remain, with houses selling for less than half their peak values, and Main Street dotted with empty storefronts that may never reopen. You'd be shocked by how isolation amplifies every economic problem in this region. Hinton, the largest community between Edmonton and Jasper, depends heavily on the West Fraser pulp mill, which has eliminated over 300 positions since 2019 due to automation and weak global markets. When your nearest alternative employment sits 2 hours away through mountain passes that close during winter storms, every job loss becomes a family crisis. The healthcare situation reveals the deeper fragility of these mountain communities. Ambulance response times in the Alberta West region average 30% longer than provincial standards, with some rural areas waiting over 90 minutes for emergency services. During the 2023 wildfire season, several communities were completely cut off from medical evacuation routes for days at a time. Here's what makes this region especially terrifying: wildfire risk that could eliminate entire towns in hours. The 2023 fires came within kilometers of Hinton, forcing evacuations and destroying critical infrastructure. Insurance companies have flagged the entire corridor as extreme risk, with some refusing to write new policies regardless of premium costs. Climate change isn't a future threat, it's a present reality that combines with economic decline to create conditions where natural disasters could finish what market forces started. These mountain communities face a choice between managed retreat and catastrophic collapse, and time is running out to make that decision rationally rather than having it forced upon them by circumstances beyond their control.